Hmm. So, there's this thing that's genuinely been bothering me for a few months now, and I've been trying to figure out exactly how to say it without sounding like one of those authenticity gurus that I deeply cannot understand. Okay. Because this isn't about being authentic. That word has been laundered so many times, it doesn't mean anything anymore. This is about something specific. The creeping, almost invisible thing that's been happening to creative work in general, where you consume something and it's totally fine. Well made, even. And then it's just gone. Like, it passes through you. Like, your brain treats it in the same way your body treats water: processed, expelled, and nothing left behind. And I keep seeing creators, writers, filmmakers talk about engagement, retention, and all of that. But nobody's asking the deeper question, which is, why does some of this stuff stick and the other stuff just evaporate? That's what I want to get into tonight. And I want to use AI as the doorway into that conversation because, well, not because AI is the villain here. I don't think it is, actually, and that's kind of the uncomfortable part. But because AI made something visible that was already happening, it just turned up the volume on a pattern that humans already built. And that instead, and the really unsettling part, you probably have done this today. You've watched something, nodded along, maybe even thought, I should share this. And then 3 hours later, it's completely gone. Not in a I forgot the details way, in a I cannot remember this happening way. Like your brain logged it, processed it, and immediately filed it under, we don't need to know this. And he moved on to the next thing, and the next thing, and the thing after that. That's the loop. That's the actual pattern no one's naming aloud. It's not because we're consuming more, it's that we're retaining less. And we've quietly agreed to pretend that that's completely normal. The scroll doesn't feel like forgetting because forgetting used to feel uncomfortable, but now it's just the pace. You forget something in real time already mid-swipe, so the emptiness never registers. It never stacks up into a feeling you can point to. It just becomes the background hum of your entire content diet. A lot of motion with very little landing. Okay. So let me start with Avatar: The Way of Water. Because I think that movie is one of the most useful examples of something going wrong in a very interesting way. Very specific way, actually, as well. And I'm not dunking on it just to dunk. I actually think what happened with that movie is worth understanding from a craft point because it's subtle. The failure isn't obvious. That's the whole point. The Way of Water is gorgeous, and I mean genuinely visually stunning in a way that few movies have ever been. The water effects alone, oh, the way the light bends through it, the way the creatures move, that's not nothing. James Cameron clearly poured everything into making it feel real, and structurally it's fine. It hits the beats. family in danger, sacrifice, resolution, the ocean is sacred. You get it. You've gotten it before. That's the problem. See, there's this thing that happens when craft gets too optimized, when every single element has been refined and smoothed and polished until there's no rough edges left. And what you end up with is something that looks like the perfect sculpture, but you can't grab onto it. There's nothing to grip. Your eyes just slide off. See, the original Avatar had this quality of people genuinely not knowing what they were looking at. It was overwhelming in a specific way. You could feel Cameron's obsession in it. The kind of obsession that doesn't care if something is too much, because the person making it is choosing something real for themselves. The first one has a specific weird earnestness to it that you can feel. The second one feels like it's executing a plan. And there's a difference. There's a big difference between watching someone chase something and watching them complete something. And I think that's where the emotion gets ironed out. Not in the writing, not in the effects, in the intent. See, the first movie was made by someone who needed to make it. The second was made by someone who knew how to make it. Those are not the same thing. And here's where it gets interesting for us as people who make things. That's actually a trap that's easier to fall into the more skilled you get. Because when you're new, you're compensating for lack of skill with desire. You're reaching, you're making weird choices because you don't know the correct choice yet. And those weird choices are sometimes the best thing about the whole project. The more you learn, the more you know what correct looks like, the more tempting it is to just do that, to execute. And execution without desire is just competence. And competence is completely forgettable. Oh. Okay. So that's one version of the problem. The over-polished thing, the optimized thing. But there's another version that I think is actually more common. And that's what I call the familiarity trap. And for that one, I want to talk about NCIS. NCIS is okay, so NCIS is one of the longest running dramas in American television history. It's been on air since 2003. At its peak, it was the most watched drama on American television. Millions of people watched it every week, still to this day. And if you ask most of those people to describe a specific episode, not a plot summary, one specific episode, something that happened that they remember, most of them cannot do it. And I don't know about you, but I find that fascinating because that's not failure. That's the show working exactly as intended. See, NCIS was designed to be consumed, not remembered. It gives you the pleasure of a story, the rhythm of a mystery, comfort of characters you recognize, satisfaction of resolution, without ever asking you to feel something new. Every episode is essentially the same episode. Different crime, same beats, same team dynamics, same outcomes. And audiences don't just tolerate that. They like that. They find it comforting. Because it's basically TV with ambient noise. Or as ambient noise. It's the visual equivalent of lo-fi hip-hop, which we're actually going to get there in a bit. But here's the thing about NCIS that matters for us. It's not soulless in the way we usually mean that word. The actors have chemistry. The writing is competent. Excuse me. The show has a consistent tone. What it doesn't have is risk. There is nothing in NCIS that could go wrong. You know that. The audience knows that. And when there's no risk, there's no tension. No tension, no emotion. No emotion, nothing to remember. It's content designed specifically not to ask anything of you. And I think that formula got very widely copied at its time of consumption. Or birth? Anyway. Not just in TV, though. In everything. In YouTube videos, newsletters, social media posts, short form content even. There's this whole aesthetic now of giving value that is essentially the NCIS model applied to educational content. That's the problem. Oh, sorry. Here's the problem. Here's 3 steps. Here's the resolution. Thank you for watching. Clean, efficient, forgettable. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying NCIS is bad. I've watched it. I loved it. But I'm just saying it perfected a specific thing. And that specific thing got copied everywhere by everyone. And then that specific thing got fed into AI training data. And now AI does the NCIS model on autopilot. The confidence structure, the reassuring resolution, the lack of mess. And when AI does it, people call it soulless. But, it learned that from us. We built the template. AI just runs it faster. See, that's the uncomfortable part. When people say AI feels soulless, they're often describing content that feels exactly like the human content they're already consuming on autopilot. The difference is that AI removes the occasional accident, the weird aside, the slightly off-brand joke, the moment where you can tell the creator got distracted by their own thought. These accidents are apparently what we were holding on to. So, yeah. Anyway, this all started because I noticed this feeling I had while scrolling, where I'd watch something, think that was good, and then immediately not be able to tell you anything about it. And I started wondering if that was a me problem or a content problem. And if I'm being honest, I think it's both. But the ratio has shifted. Because, okay, let me talk about lo-fi hip-hop. Because this is the third example and the one that I think actually explains the most. Lo-fi hip-hop is, if you're not familiar, which I doubt, but just in case, it's this genre of music that's specifically mixed to sound slightly degraded. There's vinyl cracks, slight pitch instability, and soft, rounded beats that don't push or demand anything. And it blew up specifically as study music or focus music. Hell, you can even type study music, focus music, or anything like that on the YouTube right now, and it will pop up a lo-fi video. But the thing is, about lo-fi is that it's intentionally designed not to be memorable. That's not a flaw. It's the entire product. The whole point is that you should not be able to recall individual tracks because the individual tracks are not the point. The vibe is the point. The texture is the point. And I think lo-fi hip-hop is a genuinely interesting artistic achievement because creating something that generates mood without demanding memory is hard to do well. But what happened, and this is the thing, is that lo-fi became a model for other content. Not because people consciously decided to make lo-fi content, but because the behavior it trained in audiences became the default expectation. People got so accustomed to content that runs in the background, that fills the space and doesn't cost them anything emotionally, that when something does ask something of them, it feels almost intrusive. Like, why are you making me feel things? I'm just here to vibe. Chill, you know? And that there is what I think is the actual crisis. Not AI, not lazy creators, not trends. The real problem is that audiences have been trained slowly over years to prefer content that doesn't ask anything of them. And creators have been trained by algorithms, feedback, watch time metrics, which don't lie, you're probably watching it right now, to produce content that doesn't lose people by asking too much. So you get this feedback loop where both sides are optimizing for smooth, and the result is content that moves through the culture without leaving a mark. And here's where I want to push back on something that I see a lot in creator spaces, which is this idea that viral and meaningful are opposites, but I don't think that's true. I think they operate on different timelines and require different things, but they're not opposites. See, viral content works because it triggers an instant reaction. Something surprising, outrageous, that makes you laugh so hard you can't not share it. The trigger is the entire mechanism. And triggers can be cheap, or they can be genuinely surprising. It depends on the content. But either way, viral requires speed. The thing that has to land immediately upon arrival. It has to create an impulse before the moment passes. Whereas meaningful content, stuff that actually earns the attachment, works on a different clock altogether. It's not about that first hit. It's about the return. It's about the fact that 3 weeks later, you're thinking about something a creator said, or a line in a book, or a scene in a movie, and it changed something small in how you see something. That's not a trigger. That's a shift. And shifts take time. The problem, the main problem, is that every platform we have out here is optimized for triggers, not shifts. The entire feedback system with your likes and shares and comments requires immediate reaction measurements. There's no metric for this changed how I think about something 2 weeks from now. And so creators are paying attention to the numbers, which is all of us. Don't lie. We're constantly being rewarded for the trigger and giving nothing for the shift. And I think a lot of creators have internalized this to the point where they make trigger content even when they want to make shift content. Not because they're selling out, but because the feedback loop is so immediate and so loud that it's hard to trust the slower things. It's hard to make something that feels quiet and patient when every signal you're getting says louder, faster, more immediate, more instant. But here's what I've noticed, and this is the thing I keep coming back to. The content that I actually remember, the stuff that legit changed something in me, it was almost never the loudest thing in the room. It was usually something that felt slightly off script. Something where the creator lost the thread a bit, then found it again. Where you could feel the actual thought happening in real time and not a performance of a thought that already happened. Which brings me back to AI. Because that's the thing AI doesn't do yet. And I'm saying yet deliberately because I don't think this is permanent, but for now. AI doesn't lose the thread. It doesn't get distracted by its own ideas. It doesn't go, wait, actually, hold on. This connects to something else I've been thinking about. It produces the thought that was asked for, efficiently, completely, and without the mess that happens when a real person is actually in the middle of figuring something out. And that mess, that's the signal. That's the thing audiences are actually responding to when they say a piece of content felt human, not the information, the structure, the mess, the evidence of a mind working in real time. And here's the thing I want to say about this. A lot of human content doesn't have that mess either. A lot of us, and I'm including myself in this at this moment, we edit out all the mess. We script. We rehearse. We refine. And we deliver something clean and polished that contains zero evidence of actual thinking. And then we wonder why it doesn't land the way we want it to. I think polish has been conflated with quality for so long that we've forgotten they're not the same thing. See, polish is a production value, but quality is a different thing entirely. Quality in storytelling terms is whether the thing you made created a genuine experience in another person. And genuinely polished content can fail that test completely. That's what I mean when I say humans trained AI into this pattern. We spent years optimizing our content for smoothness, clarity, structure, efficiency, all the things that make content easy to consume. AI took a look at all of that and said, got it, I can do that. And it did. Perfectly. And now we're looking at AI content and going, something's missing. Well, duh. The thing that was missing from our own content as well. It's just we didn't notice because there was just enough human residue left in it to mask the emptiness. And okay, I want to talk about what that human residue actually is, because I think it's specific and it learnable and it matters. The thing that makes content feel human when I try to break it down is evidence of contradiction, not conflict. Contradiction. The moment where a creator says something and then kind of argues with themselves, where they build a point and then undercut it slightly, not to be humble, but because the thing they're saying is actually complicated and they haven't fully resolved it. That's where I lean in. That's where I think this person is telling me something real. Because certainty is easy to fake. Certainty, in fact, is easier for AI than for humans because humans actually know when they're uncertain and let it show sometimes. And I think audiences feel certainty is a red flag now because at some level, even if they can't articulate it, it's too clean, too confident, too resolved. It reads as performance. It reads as someone who figured out what you wanted to hear and gave you that. Whereas I'm thinking about this as I'm talking, the stuff I've gone back to, the videos, essays, and books that I remember, they almost have this quality of the creator being genuinely unsure about something. Not performing humility, of course, but genuinely working through a thing. You can feel the difference. Trust yourself. I don't know how to fully describe it, but it's there. It's obvious. Look, okay, I know this is a weird example, but bear with me. There's an interview with Miyazaki. Studio Ghibli, by the way, absolutely love his stuff. Anyway, where he's talking about a scene in one of his films, maybe from a documentary that he made. And he's explaining why he made a specific choice. And halfway through the explanation, he kind of stops and goes, I don't know. Actually, I just felt it was right. In that moment, that one moment of I don't know, makes everything he said before it more credible, not less. Because you realized he wasn't explaining the decision so much as he was discovering it in real time. That's the thing. That's the signal. So, what dies first when content becomes forgettable? I think it's that. The voice, yes, but specifically the part of voice that includes doubt, the willingness to be caught mid-thought, the moment where you could go either way and you go the weird way instead of the expected way. That's what disappears first when creators start optimizing too hard. You lose the weird way. You lose the slight detour. You lose the moment where you follow your own curiosity somewhere that might not pay off. And once you lose that, you can have the perfect structure, pacing, information delivery, and it will still feel like background noise. Like NCIS. Like Lofi. Technically present, emotionally absent. There's always something about emotional risk which is distinct from intellectual risk, that a lot of creators are willing to say controversial things, take positions, be contrarian, but that's intellectual risk and it's easy to fake. You just pick a popular opinion and argue the opposite. It's a basic formula. Emotional risk is different. Emotional risk is saying, this thing scared me, or I was wrong about this for years, or I made something and I don't know if it worked. Those things where you could actually be embarrassed, not just disagree with. And most content has no emotional risk in it whatsoever, including mine sometimes, I'll be honest. It's easier to be sharp and witty than it is to be vulnerable. It's easier to be funny than it is to be honest and snarky. And sharpness reads as confidence, and confidence gets mistaken for depth, and we're back to square one. Okay, wait. Hold on. I said audiences have been trained to mistake clarity for depth, and I kind of want to sit with that for a second. Because I think it's one of the most important things in this whole conversation. See, clarity is valuable, and I'm not anti-clarity. Being clear is a skill and it matters, but clarity is a presentation value. It's about how the thing is delivered. Depth is about how much of reality that thing actually captures. And those two things get conflated constantly. Content that's well structured and easy to follow gets treated as insightful, even if the actual insight is thin. And content that's messy and hard to follow gets dismissed as unclear, even when it's genuinely grappling something that's complicated. And I believe AI accelerated this because AI is extremely good at producing clear, structured, confident-sounding content. Like, better than most humans. And so when people interact with AI-generated content and call it soulless, they're actually, without realizing it, identifying the clarity without depth as a hollow product. But they've been consuming that hollow product from creators, human creators, for years and calling it good. See, the AI just stripped away the last remaining artifacts of humanity that made it possible. And here's the part that I think should actually make creators uncomfortable. Some of the creators people love right now are people who basically use the lo-fi hip-hop model. They produce consistent, reliable, comfortable content that gives you the feeling of learning or being entertained without really demanding anything. And that works. That builds audiences. It generates revenue. I'm not knocking it as a business model. But I think if you want to make something that actually matters, that actually changes how someone sees something, that actually stays, that model will fail you. You can't optimize for frictionlessness and also create something that sticks. The friction is part of what makes it stick. And that uncomfortable hook, that's the friction. The wrongness, the thing that makes you go, wait, what? And then lean in. If everything was smooth, there'd be nothing to catch on. And here's where I want to bring this to story specifically, because everything I've been saying about content applies with twice the force to narrative. Because story is the oldest technology humans have for creating genuine emotional experiences in other people. And when it starts on running on fumes, when it produces the Avatar wave water effect, or the NCIS effect, or the Lofi effect, that's a real problem. That's not just content feels samey. That's the actual mechanism for meaning making starting to sputter. Think about what stories actually do. Not the plot, not the character arcs. What they do. Neurologically, physiologically. A good story puts you temporarily inside another consciousness. You don't just understand what a character feels, you feel a version of it. You run a simulation, and that simulation updates your model of the world. You come out of a genuinely good, affecting story with a slightly different map of reality than you went in with. That's not a small thing. That's how empathy gets built. That's how people understand lives unlike their own. That's how history gets passed on and culture is transmitted and moral thinking developed. Story is infrastructure. And when story gets optimized into the NCIS model, it stops doing that work. It gives you the pleasure without the pain and the cognitive updates. It feels like nutrition, but it's empty calories. And over time, the audience's capacity for the real thing starts to atrophy. They start preferring the comfortable version because the comfortable version doesn't ask them to do anything, doesn't ask them to sit with their emotions or to feel something that doesn't resolve neatly. And then a story comes along that does ask those things, has genuine friction, doesn't resolve cleanly, and puts you somewhere uncomfortable and leaves you there. And a significant portion of the audience reacts like it's broken. The ending didn't make sense. I don't understand what happened. It wasn't satisfying. And sometimes that criticism is valid. Not everything that's confusing is deep, but sometimes that reaction is an audience that's been trained by the Lofi model, telling you that you gave them too much to feel. So, yeah. Anyway, that's the thing. That's the thing I keep coming back to. There's a version of this conversation that ends with, so use AI as a tool and make sure your human voice comes through, which we will be talking in a couple weeks, a couple months. Anyway, and that's fine. It's practical advice, and sure, but I think the more interesting version of this conversation is this. What if the problem isn't AI at all? What if AI is just a mirror? And the mirror is showing us that a lot of content, human content, carefully made content that people spend real time on, was already running on empty. Was already using the form of meaning making without the substance of it. And if that's true, or at least I think it's partially true, then the response isn't just be more human. It's figure out what you actually want to say and whether you're actually saying it. Because you can be completely human, completely authentic, completely un-AI, and still produce content that passes through people like water if you're not actually taking any risk in it. If you're not actually putting anything on the line, if you're producing the version of your thought that you already know audiences will accept, instead of the version that's standing a little raw, unresolved, and a little wrong. See, the content that sticks is almost always the content where the creator doesn't fully know where they're going, where they're figuring it out in public, where there's something at stake, not just intellectually, but personally, and where you can feel that they could have been embarrassed by this, but they made it anyway. That's the cost I think memorability requires. Not suffering, not being a wreck, just something at stake. Some part of it that wasn't safe to share. Some part where you could have gotten it wrong and you shared it anyway. Because here's the thing about AI that I actually think is kind of beautiful in a melancholy way. AI doesn't have anything at stake. It can't. It doesn't feel the exposure of a shared unresolved thought. It doesn't know what it's like to put something out and not know if it's landed. So it produces content without that specific texture of risk. And audiences feel the absence even when they can't name it. But here's what that means for you. The human creator, the person behind the scenes. If you want to reclaim that texture, you actually have to take the risk. You have to share the unresolved thing. You have to go I don't have this figured out, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. You have to let the mess be visible sometimes. Not always, not performatively, but genuinely. But because here's what I've been watching lately, and it's a little scattered, so stay with me. There's an interesting counter movement in storytelling, in books especially, but also in some indie games and some other content creators, where the intention is getting down to that specific weird thing again. The niche obsession, the really particular detail that could have only come from one specific person who cares about one specific thing. Like, you know those books that feel like the author is going to tell you something they never told anyone before? Or the specificity is so granular and so strange that you know they weren't writing for an audience. They were writing to excavate something for themselves. That quality, that I have to get this out quality, is almost impossible to fake. And it's the opposite of the NCIS model. It's so deeply inefficient. It doesn't do the smoothed out, viewer optimized thing. It goes down weird rabbit holes. It lingers on things that don't need lingering. It makes choices that serves the creator's obsession, not the audience's comfort. And somehow, it makes it more memorable, not less. Because you can feel the obsession. You can feel that this specific detail mattered to someone. And that mattering is contagious. When someone cares deeply about something, a place, an image, a feeling, a specific historical moment, and they're giving you access to that caring, you catch a version of it. You start caring too, even if it's something you don't normally care about. This is why, by the way, travel content made by people who are genuinely obsessed with a place is so different from travel content made by people following the greatest destinations for the weekend template. The template content tells you the facts. The obsession makes you feel the place. One of those is NCIS. One of those is something else entirely. And I know, that the antidote to the emotional flatline isn't better structure, strategy, or even writer mechanics. Although, all of those matter. The antidote is recovering the thing that made you want to make things in the first place. Before you knew about retention rates and watch time and the algorithm, before you knew what good content was supposed to look like, there was a thing, a specific thing, that made you want to stay, to make, to share, to say, to speak, because it mattered to you, not because it was optimized. And if you can get back to that thing, the original weird obsession, the unresolved question, the image that's stuck in your head, that's where the memorable stuff it lives. It always lives there. Not in the execution, not in the quality of the production, not anywhere else, but in the specificity of what you actually care about, delivered with enough honesty that someone else can feel it. The emotional flatline isn't a technology problem. It's not AI's fault, ultimately. It's a loss of direction. A slow drift, I would say, from here's something I needed to say towards here's something that works. And both of those things look the same from the outside, sometimes. But one of them has a pulse and the other doesn't. And audiences feel the difference. They always have felt the difference. They just don't know the name. They don't know anything except for that it's soulless. They call it AI. They call it boring, forgettable, and I don't know. It just didn't hit. But what they're actually saying is, I could feel that nobody was home. I could feel that risk had been removed. I could feel that you already knew how this ended before you started. And that's the thing you hold on to as someone who makes things. But not as a warning, more as a compass. When you can feel yourself writing towards the safe version of an idea, or the editing happening in real time, when you're reaching for the clear resolution instead of sitting with the complicated one, that's the moment. That's when you have to choose. You can take the safe version and it will be fine. It'll be competent. It'll probably perform okay. Or you can go back and find the thing that you are afraid to say and say that instead. The afraid version is almost always the better version. I'm sorry, but it is. I don't know. That's just where I'm at with it. As I said, I've been sitting with this for a while, and I think the honest conclusion is that we have to stop confusing the form of depth with actual depth. Stop confusing clarity with insight. Stop confusing polish with power. Because the polish is going to keep getting easier and AI is going to keep getting better. And eventually, the only thing that will differentiate human creative work is the evidence of a human behind it. With their specific obsessions, their unresolved contradictions, and their specifically weird way of seeing things. That's not a small thing to protect. That's kind of the whole thing. Anyway, yeah. All right. I'm curious what you guys think. Like, genuinely, I feel like this is one of those topics where people either go, yes, absolutely, you're totally speaking my language. Thank you for saying this out loud. Or, actually, you're wrong about this. And both of those conversations are truly fascinating to me. So, in the comments below, if you've got a take or you think I'm off base somewhere, let me know. What are you thinking? What's landing? What's not? Let's get into it. This is WriteSparky, and I will see you in the next one.